This session's an hour and a half long. It's actually, in that sense, not that long because there's so much to cover. But let's get stuck in straight away. My name is Shiv Malik. I'm an investigative journalist for The Guardian and co-author of a book called Jilted Generation, which is perhaps why they invited me, because I know a little bit about economics, or at least enough to ask these guys who know a lot more the right questions. So, is the study of economics failing people? It clearly failed to predict the massive crash and the subsequent Great Recession of 2009. Further than that, is it failing to tell us why the middle classes in the West are getting poorer, or show us a path as to how 2 billion more people can join this cohort if they should be joining at all? It's one of the panelists' views. Currently, it feels like business as usual in the city. The bonuses are flying again, and we were told, and more than that, we were told that information would provide us with more fluid markets. That was the key to everything, more information. But in fact, what we're discovering is, despite a massive information, more information than perhaps we've ever had in human history, markets have been stitched up by insiders, by a few insiders, in foreign exchange and in LIBOR. And maybe we will discover more markets too. So as an academic subject, economics is in a unique position. Not only has it got bases in universities around the world, but it also has the ear of prime ministers, presidents, kings, and captains of industry. Chemists and historians, I'm sure, would love to have that much influence. But have economists been doing the influencing, or have they been the ones that have been captured by these captains of industries and kings? Does economics, in other words, serve the rich, and has it failed to serve the mass of the people? And the last point, perhaps, is, has it become too technical? Economists, certainly as Keynes, as he described, he wanted economists to be as numerous and as common and practical as dentists. They certainly aren't that today. So, with me to discuss all of this, and it is a lot, is on my far right, is Abraham Soetendorp. He's the president and founder of the Jacob Soetendorp Institute for Human Values in the Netherlands. Then we also have, next to me on my right, is Burkhard Genarig. Genarig. Yeah, we went over this yesterday. Got it right, finally. He's the executive director of the International Civil Society Center. On my left, we have Mathilde Mesnaert. She's the senior advisor to the Secretary General of the OECD. And then to my furthest left, we have Chandran Nair. He's the founder and chief executive of the Global Institute for Tomorrow. So, just to say a little bit about how this session will run. I'm going to ask the panelists some individual questions. Then after about 35 minutes, I want to go out to the audience for a few short questions. I'm going to come back to the panelists, have a further discussion, and then go out for a longer question session for the audience, okay? So get those questions ready. There's a few short ones, and then we'll come out for a longer question session. Hopefully, we'll get everyone involved. So, one quick question for you now to contemplate while you eat away. And I want you to use Wissembly, or maybe we can stick up our hands to do this. But does the study, this is a question I have for you, does the study of economics work for ordinary people? So does this study of economics work for ordinary people? You've got a couple of minutes to try and answer that question, so you might have to put your lunch down and pick up your phones instead. Okay, so Mathilde, I want to start with you. You run the New Approaches to Economics Challenges here at the OECD itself. And that project is meant to draw lessons from the financial crisis. You also have a PhD in economics. That makes you an economist, yes?
Yes.
Okay. But you've also been a management consultant with Deloitte and Touche. I might ask you whether you think you've been captured a bit later. But let me simply ask you, what is economics and what should it be? Simple question,
Okay.
long answer.
No, a short answer.
Okay, good.
What is economics? Well, economics is the study of how we produce, we exchange, and we consume things, wealth, something like that. what it should be, maybe it should be how we build up shared prosperity. But there is a slight difference between the two. So that's a short answer.
Okay. Why has it, in essence, failed? Do you think it's failed to do that? As in, it's failed to tell us about how to share prosperity better?
Well, I think it's difficult to deny the fact that economics in general and mainstream economics in particular have failed today, to predict the crisis, etc., and to build up prosperity for all. So I think that's a good basis for discussion, to admit that somehow, somewhere we have failed as economists collectively. And if your question is why?
Yeah.
Yeah, why? There are many reasons. I think one important one is the lack of diversity, because we have lacked theoretical pluralism in the economics in the last 30 years. We have had kind of a quasi-unanimism in economics, and this does not correspond to the tradition of economics, which has, economics traditionally has had very important controversies. So it has never been one idea, one main message, etc. And that's the way economics has progressed and improved. And now, in the latest period, I think we lacked diversity, we lacked pluralism, and we have been listening only to one kind of messages, and we have forgotten the other voices, the more marginal voices or the more heterodox voices in the economics field. Like, we have a lot of heterodox economics, but nobody has listened to them more recently. So that's one important lesson from this crisis, is that we should be more pluralistic, I think. Mm-hmm. The problem also is that it's not that we have had too many mathematics, because it's always something that is questioned and debated. It's that we may have been abused by mathematics, and we have not used mathematics in a wise way, like confronting the results of our models with the reality, with the history of economic facts, the history of financial facts, etc. So we have abused a little bit mathematics to hide some simple or simplistic ideas. And also, I think we need to have a different kind of mathematics to build up different kind of models, like to fully embrace the complexity of our socio-economic models. Mm. And
because famously, obviously, there's a lot of economists who couldn't do maths. A lot of economists in the past,
okay.
Keynes couldn't do maths.
I think a lot of
could do addition.
The most famous economists would not be published today in our journals. Keynes, Schumpeter, Smith, Marx, etc. So this is a problem. So and many of them are heterodox economics, if you think about today's definition of economics. So that's true that we are lacking this pluralism now in economics.
Do you think, in that sense, that the maths geeks, if you want, have taken over, but they haven't married an understanding of humanity, which is perhaps what economics is about, and understanding how humans produce things, if you want, at one end, with the actual sort of numbers on the page?
And we don't need even to go to this understanding of humanity. I'm not sure that economics will understand humanity in the whole complexity of humanity, but even understanding economic facts, economic history. So I think mathematics have been abused, and we have not confronted our models or the results of our model with the reality. And that's the basis for a scientific approach, to confront the reality with your models. So it's not mathematics or not mathematics. It's how you use mathematics, how you use it smartly and wisely.
You, as I said, have both a PhD and you worked for Deloitte. So maybe you're in a good position to answer this question. Has economics been captured by elites? Do you feel that you've been captured by elites?
I can't answer that, because if I am captured, probably I don't even know about it. So
okay.
I won't answer about me, but I think that, I think economics in general have been captured by some big interest. And you have a lot of discussion about that. You have this movie, Inside Job. You have, in French, we had a big pamphlet book like Les Imposteurs de l'économie, etc. So I think they have been captured by the interest of big finance. That's lately, in the latest like 20 or 30 years. and you still see that the too big to fail institutions are being subsidized by taxpayers, and this is based on flawed ideas that are influenced by the ideas of the bankers and the interest of the bankers. So yes, there has been a capture. And I've also worked for Citibank, by the way. So
Oh, I missed that out. Wow, okay. So,
captured, yeah.
I clearly haven't done enough research on you. One last thing, which is just so the audience are aware we're all on the same page, what are the new theories? Give us just the names and maybe what they stand for of a few of them. The new theories in economics that should be challenging what we call the heterodoxy, or neoliberalism. So there's behavioral economics as one of them.
Yeah, but I think what is more important than behavioral economics, much more like fundamental shift, is to study complexity, to study complex systems. And it gives it means that we need very different models, and it gives very different policy recommendations, because if you consider the complex system with their non-linear dynamics, you need to build up buffers, for example, redundancies in system, and that's quite different from what you're doing with the current mainstream economics, I would say. And you're try to target order rather than equilibrium. You try to do piecemeal social engineering instead of targeting a grand design, etc. So I think this is a very fundamental shift, a very important one. But, and to do that, we are not the only one. I mean, we need to look at what the other social science or hard science are doing, because you have the sociologists, the physicists, of course, but also like the ecologists that are using these complex models, and we should learn from them. So we should be much more modern mathematicians, if you... something like that.
Some big challenges. Yeah. Okay, so before I go on to my next guest, we have the results of the poll. What do they say? So no. Does the study of economics work for ordinary people? No. 70% say no. Okay, well, I think we might come back to that question. Maybe the results will change, or maybe not. On my right, we have Burkhard Generik for the International Civil Society Center. So the center helps the world's leading civil society organizations, such as Amnesty International, Oxfam, and the WWF, maximize their impact for a sustainable and more equitable world. If you want, it's the NGO's NGO. Is that right? Something like that? Something like that. Okay, you need your mic. And you're also the author of The Hedgehog and the Beetle. Have you got a copy here?
Yes.
Yes? You're going to show it to the audience so your publisher will be happy? Then they buy the book? And it roughly is about disruption and innovation in the civil society sector. On that basis, do NGOs need to... There we go. That's the book. That's the one you should be looking for. They've all got books, by the way. Do NGOs need to better understand the technicalities? This is something that you were raising with me before, of economics, to get stuck into the academic debate and change the outcome? Because usually they're kind of set aside, perhaps, maybe? Go ahead.
My answer would be yes and no. There is general criticism that civil society organizations aren't all too interested in economics, and for example in 2007, 2008, in the big crisis, there was nobody out there who had alternative concepts, who had a quality criticism. So you have very small, highly specialized civil society organizations which are really focusing on economics. All the rest is not. And for most people in our sector, this is not a sexy topic. So we suffer from it, and we try to remedy the flaws when we work in the field, but we are not really dealing with the issues. And clearly, the world is about power, and making the world a better place won't work without power, so ignoring economics is not a good strategy. Therefore, yes, they should be involved more. No, because the economics as we perceive it at the moment is not serving our cause, and it's damaging our cause, and that is a big problem. I think for two reasons. One is it still comes across as an exact science. We just heard about mathematics, but it's not. It's much closer to social science, and so a lot of it is speculation. I think it would be good if economics itself and those who work with economics accept that that is the fact. It's not mathematics. The second issue is most of the theories, and I'm not an economist, so I won't stand a in-depth discussion on that, but as I perceive it, most of the theories are built on the assumption that you can exploit our planet without limits. And an economy, as somebody said, on a finite planet, which is based on infinite growth, doesn't make sense. And so as we get closer to our planet's boundaries, as we start feeling the impact of climate change, as water gets scarce, as arable land gets scarce, we can't continue not putting a price on exploiting the planet and on polluting the planet. And somehow economics as it is at the moment is definitely failing humanity and is failing securing the basis of our future existence. So we need to talk about a very different economic approach if we want to survive.
Yes, feel free to applause if you can move your lunch out the way. Or not. Let me ask you something then, which may seem controversial, but we have in the field of economics now, from outside perhaps the academic study, heard a lot about inequality. Thomas Piketty, obviously, his book was from inside the academic field. But does inequality matter? Does it matter at all?
Well, as a regular reader of The Economist, I find that even mainstream economics now sees inequality as a problem. It sees inequality as a problem in economic terms, and I won't argue that because I'm missing the basis for that. But I think it's very clearly a problem in political terms. It's a problem in social terms. It's a problem for peace in the world. And if we're getting close to a situation now where 1% of the world population owns as much of our planet as the other 99% together. So inequality has rarely been as dramatic as it is today, and in most continents it's still growing. And I believe that we underestimate the dynamite in that challenge. And clearly an economic system and an economic theory which does not have the question of how to secure a higher degree of equality as one of its core components won't be resolving that issue, and there is clearly a gap which kind of mainstream economists need to look at.
Within the study of economics, from what you see, and for those who call themselves economists, do you think there is a change underway post 2008-9 and the lesson, or are we reverting to business as usual?
Well, we are reverting to business as usual, and a change is underway. The problem, and
can't keep giving me dual answers,
Yes, but that's the situation. I think the awareness is growing, and it won't go away. So you can read about it, you hear people talk about it, but if you look at the facts, what has changed? How far have we controlled the banks? How far are we secure against the next economic crisis? Then clearly you need to be very worried because we haven't drawn the consequences. And as I said, our sector hasn't used the window of opportunity around 2008 to 2010 to seriously come up with alternatives, or at least with challenges to the existing system. So I think we are in a very vulnerable situation, but I would also say this is not just economics. That's us in political terms, and that's our sector as well. The book I was just kindly invited to kind of show you talks about the fact that our sector is being disrupted. The world is not continuing to kind of continue in the way we are used to, and we need to dramatically change our own approaches. And I think the same is true for economists. Yesterday's recipes won't work.
Thank you. To my far left, Chandran, what were you doing there?
Chewing gum.
Oh, well. Chandran works for the Global Institute for Tomorrow. He's the founders of that. And GIFT is an independent Pan-Asian think tank based in Hong Kong. You're also the author of The Other 100. I think you have a whole display outside for your book. And it's supposed to be, in essence, a counterpoint to the Forbes Rich List. Just briefly, just tell us a little bit about why you did that, or why you put it together, The Other 100, why it's important.
Actually, can I depart from that?
Yes, so okay.
The book that's most relevant to this conversation is my other book called Consumptionomics and Asia's Role in Reshaping Capitalism and Saving the Planet. So can I come to the question of The Other 100, was essentially my view that the narrative around mainstream media, economic circles, etc., is so blinkered that it needs to shake up. So I'd like to just kind of address a couple of points that's made here and then take it from there. I mean, coming from the Asia-Pacific region, the only value I have here is to perhaps put a pin in the bubble of the conventional wisdom that seems to exist in this part of the world. And I'll try and say it delicately and politely so I won't be eating dinner all by myself, or lunch. You know, what's really interesting to me is that when we talk about economics, essentially you're talking about Western thought. Economics is essentially a Western construct, modern economics anyway. It's Western economics, and I think it started with Adam Smith. He's still held as a saint, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's how old-fashioned the idea is, that they still have to go back 250 years. But having said that, so it's a Western construct, and it still dominates the worldview. Now, Shiv, you asked about who's been captured by whom. Well, the good news is all those billions of Asians have been captured and are subservient to the Western ideas. This is a terrible dilemma. So my argument is, what will the new economics look like? Well, the new economics will look like people like...
Wait, why is it a terrible dilemma? Just so the audience is clear.
Because the whole Western construct, and this is not a rant against the West, okay? I have many European and American friends. But
that's never a good way to start that bit. But
no, it's deliberate.
Yeah.
It's deliberate. You see, I have Jewish friends, black friends, all of those things. The reason for saying that is essentially, if one looks at the last 3 centuries, essentially the modern world was built by essentially a small minority called the West, controlling the resources of the world, colonialism, etc. Slaves were the first free resources. So much for economics. Now, that built the modern world, and essentially that created the understanding of economics as essentially designed by Western thought. What's good for the West must be good for the rest of the world. What works in the West must work in the rest of the world. The Americans have, of course, fine-tuned it. What works in Texas must work for the rest of the world, too. So that's where we are. The problem is that those of us in the developing world who wanted to be liberated and finally got liberated said, my God, they have left. Now we want to be like them. Yeah? So now we want revenge. Having not written our own books about what we should be doing, we now want to copy. And I notice this constant reference to economists. I never hear one non-Western name. But actually, there were a lot of people who were thinking about these things. Unless you think, of course, all these old civilizations had no ideas of their own, that Tibetan monks in the 15th century had not thought about the distribution of resources, the allocation of rights, etc. Well, you'd be surprised. Many people did think about that. But unfortunately, didn't write in English and didn't get pressed by Random House. And so no one read about it, you see. So, but you should be extremely aware. There's a lot of thought that went into these issues in ancient civilizations, the Chinese. But, you know, to demonize China now is, of course, the flavor of the month. The Indians, my God, how would they know anything? They can't even build toilets. So what happens is that in the Asia-Pacific region, now we have a whole sort of let's catch up. But this catching up would be disastrous. And before you ask me the second question, the point I want to make is essentially this. The new economics for the 21st century will answer this big question. How can 5 to 6 billion people in Asia, and I'm only talking about Asia, but you know, Africa, how can 5, 6 billion of these people continue to aspire to ape Western economic ideas and lifestyles? This is not possible. It's against all the laws of physics, entropy, etc. Yet the economists say we can have it all. So the difficult question for the economists, because it's also behavioral, etc. For me, economics is purely political. It's political decisions. I think the Korean economist Ha Jun-chung, who teaches at Cambridge, says economics is politics. It's political decisions. So if we in Asia, and I'm going to just use Asia, and it's a broad brush definition, if we in Asia can't have it all because it defies all the laws of entropy, then what does freedom look like? What are your rights? What can we have? Because the reality today is that, and I think in one of your questions to all of us, you said, can poor people be happy? Yes, they can. But the point is that 80% of the world's population, my friends, live on $10 a day. I live in Hong Kong. That buys you a cheap McDonald's or something like that. The point is, though, that all of us can't be rich. The economic lie that belies mainstream economic thinking is somehow there is a panacea, all of us can be rich. We can't. In our part of the world, we will not all be rich. It'll be terribly messy. We can't have everything. Some of our rights will have to be curtailed. We can't all have cars.
Okay,
Who's
so
going to do that?
on one hand, you appear to be posing a kind of Malthusian argument, the argument that, look, we can't all get rich and, it's all going to be, somehow we're going to have to curtail this. On the other end, or as part of that spectrum, if you want, then you say, well, look, political rights are going to have to be curtailed or are being curtailed to temper people's aspirations. Draw that out. What do you mean by that? Okay. Do you mean that you have to lock people up because they want a car or a house?
I thought you
or something less than that? I don't know. I don't know what you mean.
All right. First thing, let's put that Malthusian thing aside. I mean, when Malthus talked about these things, again, that was a very Eurocentric view of the world. But having said that, he was right. He just got the timing wrong. But when Malthus talked about those things, we didn't have hedge funds. Okay, we didn't have some supercomputers that traded tons of wheat on a millisecond with people who were never going to own it. We didn't have essentially the two-stroke engine. We didn't have all of that. We didn't have fracking, etc. So let's put that aside. The science is very clear. There are limits. And the population of the world is not where Malthus was, even his worst predictions. So let's please put that away. Now coming back to your point about essentially, where does the state involve in this? I mean, I call in the Asia for a rejection of the Western liberal narrative that the solutions lie in technology. You know all of that stuff, innovation, right? Smoke a magic a pipe or something. Innovation, and somehow everything will be cured. We can all have everything with democracy, and somehow the solutions will be found through free markets. I call for a rejection of this lie. Right, so I'll give you one example only so that no one's going to go to jail, but this is how it works. If all Asians had car ownership levels taken for granted in the OECD countries, where it's about 750,000 people, 750 per thousand, do you know how many cars ownership levels are in China, which is the world's largest car market? Any guesses? OECD, please. Okay, it's about 175, okay? India is about 35. Indians haven't even started driving. Now, we're being told that the economic industrialization model is all we poor Asians must have cars. Now, if you've been to any Asian city, right, you will know that we need more cars like I need a hole in my head. True? True. Okay. So, but the entire economic model is industrialized through the automotive industry and everything will be okay. If we all had cars, like taken for granted in the West, you know how many cars there'll be in the world by 2050? 3 billion cars. 3 billion cars, which will require the entire oil shipment from OPEC countries just to drive cars. Now, the lie we are being told is, hey, you'll have green cars. You all heard that one? Science fiction, go watch the movie. It ain't happening yet. If it can't happen in Germany, it ain't happening in Indonesia, my friends. It's not happening.
We're going to come back to some of these points, no doubt. There's some interesting stuff about, how we cured cholera. I don't think 100 years ago people think we could do that, or various other diseases in the world. But we'll come back to that in a bit. So, on my furthest right, and someone who knows about the long term, is Rabbi Sudendorp. He was born in occupied Netherlands in 1943 and survived the Holocaust. Through your working life, you have been an advocate of human rights and an ecological activist. You're the co-founder of the Global Interfaith Alliance, and involves religious leadership in the struggle for water, sanitation, and hygiene. give us an insight into that long-termism. We've had the Millennium Development Goals specifically. This was supposed to be sort of, the NGO sector and religion getting involved in some sense with both development and economics and setting these goals. Have they been successful?
Well, fortunately, it has been largely successful. To my surprise, because I've called for, if we do not come to, for instance, half the number of people who are in hunger by the year 2015, this is the bankruptcy of our human society. And I must say, it is true, it is half, but not counting the number of people who arrived since. It's about equality between women and men, boys and girls at schools. It is about a large amount of access to water, not to talk about the quality of water. There is still a lot to be done. So I am, in fact, seeing something extraordinary happening, that there is cooperation, more cooperation between civil society, politics, business. To you, I learned that the NGOs together are about the 7th or 8th power of finance in the world. This was quite a shock to me, that in some way a million NGOs are a very important voice. Now,
so just explain that again, that a million NGOs, if you put them all together, they'd be the 7th or 8th largest economy in the world.
In the world.
Okay.
So it is, but the cooperation between NGOs is very much lacking. As I'm a member of one particular NGO, and I won't mention it now just for the argument's sake, I find that there is much and much more that NGOs can do. Now, religion, it is very, I'm very privileged. I feel very privileged to be in your midst. I don't see bishops, cardinals, imams at this moment, while still a large majority of the humankind has a spiritual connection. So, yes, I understand the dangers of religion. I'm here because of a split-second decisions by people to save a baby. Those split seconds mean that people have a volition. My life is always imbued with that. Just 3 weeks ago, I was in Israel, where there was a meeting between the Catholic Church and the Jewish people, cardinals, bishops, rabbis, and the church was penitent. At the same time, when I went to Paris, one warned me not to wear a kippah on my head. And when I go to shul, to the synagogue in The Hague, in this lovely The Hague, there are military police, 5 of them every service. But I do not want to have this picture in connection with what is happening today, because at the same time, a quiet revolution of spiritual traditions in the world means that more and more people for different spiritual traditions finally understand that we have to work together to realize our common goal of peace and justice. It seems to be so simple, but it took us thousands of years. So these are two trends at the same time. The fear in Europe, and at the same time the possibility. Now I think that we have an opportunity in the spiritual world to work together, and we are not doing it well enough. And now to the future, I believe that in September and December, the United Nations, the people of the world, will accept a covenant of sustainability by which acute poverty will be erased by the year 2030. That is what is being said. But I believe it. It's not only poverty, and I agree with you. It's not about poverty, it's about misery. It's about not only lack of food, of lack of money. Thor Heyerdahl, I don't know if anybody in the room still remembers him, one of the revolutionaries, those adventurers. He went all through the world. I was privileged to see him. He said, I sometimes found more bliss, more optimism amongst the poorest tribes in the world than in Western society. But it is misery, and it is the right of everyone. And I also agree, with you, Shannon, that when in 2000 we together came to draw an Earth Charter, which is still a very important document about sustainability. The woman, the leader from the Maoris, from New Zealand and Australia, she said suddenly, you do not understand us. You still use Western language. You do not understand what a tribe is and what a family is. And I became very much aware that we have to be equal in this new process. And now to the economists, yes.
Yeah, let me ask you this question then. Why doesn't religion, or religious institutions, and therefore perhaps also NGOs, why don't they get involved in setting up new institutions like they once did? Barclays Bank, I'm thinking only of a few British examples here, but there are a number of banks, including Barclays, which is a huge, massive global bank, and I could probably name a few others, which were set up by Quakers. They're sort of Christian groups and other Christian groups as well. And for a good 150 years or so, they were run like that. And they were run to help the people in their community. Religious organizations seem not to be doing that anymore. Is it because finance is too complicated? Because they don't want to get involved? They don't see it as their mission? And of course, we could look at Latin America as well, where religious movements got involved very much with economics, like down and dirty, right in the middle of it.
Well, at the end of 90s, the Jubilee movement, which came from the Bible, succeeded in annulling the debts of the poorer countries by tens billions at one side, and the E8 took it. There was an energy. There is an energy in some places, as you mentioned, but it is religion also. We in religious institutions sometimes also become bureaucratic. We also are part of this world. And so there is a new way. In New York, just last September, we came as religious organizations about climate change. And not only were we signing our commitments, but there were 500,000 people on the streets. And so I think there is a new energy arising, but I ask you also here in the hall, for cooperation. Because when I try with my colleagues to establish an alliance of religions for sanitation and hygiene, to build toilets, to have toilets in every home, it is very difficult to have this structure, to have these possibilities of organizing ourselves, to have the finances to do what we want to do, and to keep the spiritual intent of my colleagues in Hinduism, in Buddhism, but also in humanism. It is a wonderful opportunity at this moment and age to really cooperate and use our talents and to combine this spiritual knowledge that we are working for the generations to come, for the unborn, and have responsibility for the future, and to have all those capabilities of technology and to really become compassionate economics.
We're going to go out to the audience, to you, I said the audience as if they're somewhere else. They're right in front of me. Shortly for questions, so get them ready. You can either, as I said, use Wissembly or put up your hand. So I'm just going to ask the panelists just one or two other things quickly before we do that. So get your questions ready. But let me get you in the mood by reading out some of your comments. Agreed. Most of popular authors are from Western country, but we're not that narrow-minded. I think that's to you, Chandran. To name just one, Amartya Sen is not unknown. I thought that's a good point. Another 1% of the world owning as much as the other 99%. Time for new economies. And
Can I answer that?
no, not yet. And economics is a Western construct, I think. And that's just a quote from you. So, okay. Oh, yeah, I like this one. Nice to see a good mood and laughing in the OECD pink room. Ah, there you go. Burkhard, Chandran, Mathilde, just quickly, do you want to follow up on any of those points
Yes,
that have already been raised?
Yes.
Go.
First of all, on your question about why don't civil society organizations build those new structures, they do, but they don't do often enough and consistently enough. For example, we get our electricity from Greenpeace. So in Germany, they formed an electricity company, and if you want to be sure you get electricity from renewable sources, you buy your electricity from Greenpeace. I believe that we need much more of that. And I think that especially the large civil society organizations will do that anyway because their traditional sources of funding are drying up. So I believe this is, so to say, a challenge, but also an opportunity. Second point, Chandran, I hear you talking about the colonial past, about the West being, well, what they are, and I couldn't agree more. And I would say, yes, in our sector still, I detect colonial thinking, and we have a story here we have to deal with. On the other hand, the challenge I see is we're living in a globalizing world, and now replacing what the Germans did wrong by what hopefully the Indians or Chinese do right will still not give us the right global approaches. And I see in Germany and in India people who have the right thoughts and people who want to stick on the road to disaster. So what I would hope is that people like us become allies, no matter whether we are living in Asia or in Europe. And I think I would want to divide the world into the pioneers. Hopefully we're sitting in this room, and those who still need to sort of develop understanding that the world can't continue the way it's going so far.
Right. Can I just pick up?
Allies?
Of course. I
Okay.
mean, I think, and I mean this very respectfully, I think it's extremely lazy reaction to suggest that I'm being divisive, because you're not used to hearing this stuff. Okay? It's also lazy to say that I'm saying Western thought leaders are narrow-minded. No, they're not narrow-minded. Their insights are not global enough. It's also very difficult for people in Western think tanks to think differently about a world given all the privileges and entitlements. If I've been in control of the world for 200 years, it's very difficult for me to think differently. I will obviously relent and say I think the Europeans are getting it. The Americans haven't yet. So this is not about us against them. I'm all about allies. I'm about changing the narrative fundamentally. And because you're not used to people like me, you think, my God, this guy must be a radical, or he's anti-us. I mean, this is lazy, okay? I'm not anti-anybody. I'm more the global citizen than anybody else. But it's not about globalization. It's about where we're going. Many of you might not, but maybe I see some African brothers and sisters here, others, etc. It's very difficult to understand what humiliation does to people. Very difficult. Unless you have been humiliated for 2-3 centuries, you do not know how deeply subservient people are in other parts of the world.
But do you think
that
India, India, I don't know China very well, but I do know India a little bit. And you travel there now, they don't feel humiliated. They feel like they're about to take grasp of this part of their world.
Yeah, they are about to, and let's hope they will. My point, though, is, and I don't want to give you all the examples because it'll sound extremely sort of painful to reiterate. But the subservience of Asians is manifold. Okay, I can give you lots of examples about this, etc. From skin whiteness being the most sought after beauty product in India, to Africans going blonde, straightening hair. Malcolm X talked about this. All of this is wide. What I'm trying to say in the economic realm is we don't have ideas of our own. We must have ideas of our own. Those ideas must come from a principled understanding. 5-6 billion people in Asia, Pacific, and Africa cannot and should not aspire to live like the average European or American. Kaput. Not possible. Therefore, what does the economic thinking look like? That economic thinking, sorry to just expand, flies in the face of the Western level narrative, which is the individual is king, freedom is unfettered, democracy will rule, and freedom and technology will solve the problems of the world. This cannot happen. We need to understand this. Now, this is anathema, I know, to the mainstream narrative. But I've given you the example of the cars. Do you want me to talk about fish, fisheries, and oceans? If all the Chinese ate one meal of fish every day, like the average Australians, the oceans would be empty. Now, who's to tell the Chinese they can't eat fish?
Okay. We're going
So this is the resource constraint. This is an economic argument which essentially translates into political action.
We're going to go out to the audience, and I'm sure they will want to ask you about that too. Mathilde, very briefly, any other points you wanted to follow up on? Do you think Adam Smith is often traduced, I think unfairly? I don't know if you want to talk about Adam Smith. You don't want to talk about Adam Smith. His book, one of his books is called The Moral Sentiments, and in that sense, I think, anyway, anyone who want to talk about Adam Smith? Yes, okay, no, okay. Well, if they do, you can, put your hand up, and, okay, all right, we've got one question over there, so quickly. Any points you want to follow up on?
Just to say that doesn't work.
Yeah,
okay, that works. Okay, I think that economics is changing. Not enough, not quickly enough, for sure, and it's very difficult because you have a lot of, comfortable situation where you don't want to jeopardize your situation, and it's difficult to say, okay, what I've been thinking or what I've been working on is not right. So you basically you destroy your intellectual capital somehow, or you question it. So it's very difficult. But economics is changing, and even like the OECD, that could be considered as like the temple of mainstream economics, is changing also. And we are trying to go to look for well-being instead of growth per se. We are still too much on growth, that's true, but we are really trying to go to this direction and to build up the tools so that we could do it properly. We're trying to focusing much more on inequality. So, and as you may know, the OECD is not the more radical of the economic places by definition, by its governance, etc. It has to be consensual. So it moves slowly, very slowly, but it moves. It's moving. And the economic, in general, it's difficult to speak about all economists, but I think probably you have much more now attention to these heterodox voices that are trying to give to really discuss the most important things first, and not only obscure differences between obscure things, but discuss the real problems, like the planet is limited, etc. And they are being more heard, I think, now. So we begin to have a real debate.
The gentleman over there has a question.
Thank you.
Questions, though, for everyone. Keep it short and punchy.
Thank you very much. Well, I came in this temple and a pink room just to see whether I get an answer whether we need a new economics. And though I had a good lunch, I couldn't get an answer to that. I mean, what I knew is what the new economics should not be about, but I didn't get the answer what the new economics should be. It was a very interesting debate. It's West, East, planet, we all know that. We came here to know what the new economics is going to look like. I heard in the beginning that economics need to be more complex. We heard that economics should not be just mathematics. But I'm totally confused about it. I think you should ask this question to each of these panel members. What should be at least gross elements of new economics?
That's a very good point. We're coming on to the solutions. Thankfully or not, the debate isn't over, and we're coming. When we come back, we're going to talk about the solutions to that. Sorry if I didn't make that clear, because I think you can't complain without giving some solutions. So start thinking of solutions if you haven't already. The lady at the back. There's two ladies there actually sitting next to each other. Let's go for both of them. So we'll answer your question, sir.
Yes, Christine Hutton. I'm a professor and I'm more into behavioral economics. So I'd like to ask the panel the question: if you really think that new economics need new approaches, there are a lot of blockage and limitations that you cannot experiment new approaches because of how they challenge current valuation methodologies. And I think OECD is well positioned to help with this. For instance, methodologies on pricing system for essential medicine are currently under big outcry by NGOs because of enormous problem with anti-cancer expensive pricing. You have the key economic role in discussing with governments around the world why there's not more to help with people who try to propose new methodologies, for instance, in pricing system, and you know that these new methodologies are challenging the current valuation of and estimates of litigations and block what we can do. So what you as OECD or leading expert can help with this, because it's critical problems.
Just very briefly, what do you think? Hold the mic for 1 second. Keep it with you. What do you think should change? Just as in, because you've said that there are different pricing mechanisms.
Well, I think...
without being too complicated for the rest of the audience.
Yes, I think currently the supply side is not too much in trouble because they can manage to get the economics of it and they have a good value system.
Okay.
The problem, as you say, is inequality is more the demand side. But nobody is interested to experiment new approaches for the demand side. Governments are in deficit, they can't pay, the consumers can't pay. So there is a need from people like you to help with the approaches that can help the demand side.
Mathilde, do you want to answer that briefly? Which is just basically to ask, what more can the OECD do, let's put it out more widely, to bring in other approaches?
I think what the OECD can do, and what I will say what it can and what it can't, maybe it's to be really more open to new approaches and suggestions, and at least to make sure that there is a real debate about these new approaches where there is no consensus. The problem, the limits of the OECD is that by our governance, we are limited because we need to reach a consensus of our member countries, even like a soft consensus. Nobody, and it's very, believe me or not, some ideas that everybody agrees on and that seems very reasonable, like, okay, we should use more complex systems in our analysis. I mean, this is difficult to have this in a document because you might have only one of our member countries objecting to that because it's not mainstream, So, I mean, believe me, it's difficult to be radical at the OECD. But what we can do is to at least to put the topics on the table and make sure that these are debated and these are more or less progressively become more discussed and eventually become a new norm, like trying to build new norms, but it takes time. And as you said, economics, it's politics, and we are depending on the politics of our member countries.
But
Chandran, very briefly.
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, that question, I tried to answer it by saying that the new economics of the 21st century will be defined by what the developing world, which constitutes 70 to 80% of the world, does in not aping. So two things, and I won't go into the details, but it's in my book, by the way. The first one is essentially put economic activity subservient to essentially maintaining the vitality of natural resource system. That's an old economic theory never practiced. The second one clearly is a political action, is to put collective welfare ahead of individual rights. For instance, therefore, if we look at climate change issues, etc., car ownership is not a human right. So you change that whole matrix. You put collective on it, because the ability of individuals to exercise that individual right to car ownership will create a catastrophic outcome for the collective. So you change that. And the other thing is to completely redefine the idea about productivity and how it's measured in a world which is constrained by resources. That's it. But we can spend time going after those details. But that's fundamentally the issue. That does not sit comfortably today with the current economic premise of individual rights being sacrosanct.
Okay, I tell you what, we've got so many questions already. I'm going to scrap the bit where we come back. We're going to just go on to solutions. I'm going to get questions about solutions, no doubt, and other things. Is that all right? Feel better with that? Because there's lots of hands going up, and I've got lots of things coming in here. So do you want to talk just briefly, just generally about where you think solutions might come from?
Well, very briefly, because I think it's really important to get the audience to talk. I think carbon pricing within the existing system would be something, if it would be organized better and the price would be realistic, which could set an example for how you can manage scarce resources better. And I think you could think about many other areas where you could price the exploitation of our planet. The second area clearly is the question of managing distribution in order to tackle inequality. So if you just price carbon or price anything else, okay, so it's a censorship. If you just price carbon or anything else, that means only the rich one can afford to use it. So just pricing resources doesn't help us. You need to combine it with a fair distribution mechanism, which makes sure that everybody in the world can lead a decent life. And very clearly, I agree with Chandran's point, car ownership can't be a right because we can't afford it. What Chandran is kind enough not to say is that this doesn't mean just that Asia needs a different development approach. It means that Europe needs a different development approach and a dramatically different approach. So we can't keep our cars and not allow the Asians to have them.
But I'm not hopeful that the Europeans can change.
Okay. We got that. We got that. Go at the back. The lady at the back. Is it lady?
Hi, Christine Schaefer. I'm from the Department of Foreign Affairs in Australia. I'm really enjoying Chandran's input, and I just wanted to do a shout out on the OECD. Australia, New Zealand, Myanmar, Indonesia were key proponents of the OECD Southeast Asia Regional Program, which is a regional network that brings together both developed and developing economies to talk about economic issues and kind of diffuse the OECD's economic recommendations into Asia through a dialogue. So an example that happened last year was Malaysia worked very closely with the OECD on SMEs, small to medium enterprises. And the other point is there is a really good economist, Bagwadi.
He lives in the US, he's captive.
Oh, yeah. Well, maybe we'll have him over next year. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Henry Rees of the French-German NGO Energie Franco-Allemande. I was here at the session before, and I'm happy that I stayed for lunch because I discovered a passionate debate. And the subject before was the sharing economy. So are we not on the way already with sharing economy? I'm a modest engineer, but for me it's a mixture between communism and capitalism. Wouldn't that be a way?
Okay, that's a very good question. Can I add to that by saying if we have it, and by sharing economies means that, for example, there's a scheme in lots of major cities. It's called Zipcar in London. That's one firm that does it where people share cars. Airbnb, people might know, where you share spare rooms, basically. However, the addition is that is people who own the cars and people who own the property still make, it would seem, all the money. Is that just the capitalist bit, or is that the end goal? Who knows? Is it better distribution resources?
No,
you want to come back on that?
I mean,
Rabbi?
the sharing economy is a kind of luxury hippie thing. It's not a real world thing.
Okay, well, 1 second. Let's hear the pro view, perhaps.
Well, some people say capitalism is like religion. It's a faith. And therefore, in the religions, there are revolutions also in the faith. So I think that, for instance, what came out, fair trade, true prices, what is the real true prices? These are things that we can very much work on together. And, it's also that there is a force about we in ecological world, and sometimes you see it also, we had a time of doom. The world is going to be destroyed. And I think that when you threaten with hell and damnation has never made a person more ethical. But when you speak about hope and perspective, it propels to action. And sharing economy, I don't yet see the exactitude of it, but this fairness and equality, and at the same time involving the other generations. Even talking about cars, in the 1990s, we had a discussion somewhere in Japan with religious leaders about it's not a question whether I can afford a second car, but whether society can afford me having a second car. That was already in the 1990s. We are moving slowly, but you know, there is a movement, and we should never forget. For myself, I say it, we don't have the luxury of despair.
It's a lovely thought. Can I just ask the audience a quick question, just by using your hands? Do you think the fair trade movement has been successful in the country which you live in? And do you know about it, the fair trade movement? So where the rabbi was talking about fair trade prices. Put your hands up if you think it has been successful.
It's a nice fringe thing.
Well, a few things. Oh, does the fringe thing provoke more people to put their hands up? I don't know. Okay, so maybe maybe 10% of the audience. Okay.
Can I just mention
sure,
sharing
briefly,
economy? Yeah. This is all very good stuff. It's like, you know, green tech and green cars. This is all nice stuff that advance economies and people with a conscience want to now say is going to save the world. But let's look at this. The majority of people in the Asia-Pacific region, I'm going to pick on India today. At about 6 p.m. today in India, 400 million people are going to go home without any electricity. This is no sharing involved here. The basic obligation of the Indian government to move people out of the misery and drudgery of life, and not just Indians, Indonesians, etc. We're talking 3-4 billion people here. This is not about an app and how I'm going to share my car and my spare room. This is about the basic rights to live. For them, is going to be a major investment in infrastructure. This is going to involve not all those nice windmills that I like to have and see. It's going to be coal, and it's going to be dirty coal. So the world is going to be messy as these people have to have the basic rights. Now, I don't want to talk about food, etc. But the sustainability and economic issue is not about how rich people are going to do some nice, good things. We need to move away from this. It's about how the majority of the human population, which is about 5 to 6 billion people, don't have access still to the basics. Those who live on $10.
Okay, let me talk to you then. Let's say, take the example of Africa. People thought, okay, well, look, you know, if you're going to build infrastructure, for example, in telecommunications, it's going to take decades and decades. You're going to have to put all these phone lines in. But actually, technology found a way. You were wrong about that. Because I'm sure 15 years ago, you may have said, well, it's never going to happen.
But I'm not wrong about that.
Mobile phone usage has gone up massively.
No,
now people are banking over mobile phones in Africa.
Okay, let me give you an example. Today, we have more people in Africa and India with mobile phones than toilets. Now, just before dinner, that gives me constipation. Now, the problem with people who just want to, get on the technology bandwagon is to say, you said something else earlier, which is, I'm getting a bit animated here, excuse me. You said something earlier. You said something earlier about, hey, we have cures for cancer. Do you know what percentage of the world's population can afford cancer cures? You know, the heart surgery, first heart surgery was 100 years ago. Today, heart surgery is available. What percentage of the world can afford that? Less than 5%. So it's not that we can do something, it's the ability to afford it. And then you have to move people out of the drudgery of daily life, which is the majority of the world. But if you sit in London or Munich or Berlin, you might not see this. You only watch it on Discovery Channel. And that's the difference.
You want to come back on this quickly?
Yes.
We've got to get more questions. There's so many questions. It's wonderful.
Chandran, I agree with you and with your focus on Asia and India in that case. I disagree with you very strongly by not focusing on the so-called developing world. I have lived in Papua New Guinea for 2.5 years, and I have been walking to find villages where we were working, and people there, they didn't have electricity, nothing. They knew exactly what they wanted: a TV set, a car, going on holidays, and so on. So basically, the Western ideas are everywhere. And if you can't convince the Western audience to understand that they have to change their lifestyles, you will not just get Asia to develop in ways which are not as comfortable, not as mobile, not as privileged as ours. So
But
I think we really need to work on our countries and cultures. Development cooperation has as a principle, we give some money to Asians and Africans in order for them to leave us alone and to protect our comfortable lifestyles.
You should stop that.
We need to stop that.
And you should stop that. And that's what you need to work on. And that's my point. I don't think the Western nations need to feel some burden to help all these people. You should work on yourself.
We're straying, though, into development
but you don't
than
want to, because you want
economics.
the primacy of some moral authority.
Okay. Lady at the back there had it on the middle row-ish. Go on. Ask your question. Yes.
Well, I'm a development economist, so that's a good link, I guess.
Perfect.
I work at UNICEF now, but in a previous life, I worked at a think tank that was based at a university, and we were dedicated to sort of more inclusive economics dialogue. So I had the sort of opportunity to see a lot of peer review processes and things like that. And I think this speaks to some of what you're saying, Chandran. I don't necessarily agree with a lot of it, but I think that what I definitely saw was that debates in economics where alternative viewpoints come in, it's not really about disagreements among intellectuals. It's about a closing down of an idea space and somehow some sort of fear of new ideas. And I think there's a sort of that's how sort of the academy seems to work. So I'm wondering how we have a more inclusive economics where this where there seems to be new ideas aren't sort of they're feared, it seems.
Mathilde, can I ask you a quick question? This is the point about the foreign exchange trading, LIBOR, we've seen corruption, and those markets, they're huge markets, being stitched up by a very small, powerful elite. And we told, look, beforehand, this couldn't happen, more information than ever before, more players, it's open, it's transparent. That turned out not to be, or is turning out, I should say, allegedly, not to be true. Is it about more information now, or is it about power? Where's that debate? Are economists going, actually, we've been fooled. We've been fooled. It's not about information. It's about about power, which is a different form of thinking.
So what is about power? Sorry. I mean, if you ask me, we don't need more information. We need more we need more access to power and more transparency on the power structures and more debate on the power structures and more transparency on the information.
What I'm trying to get at, do economists feel embarrassed? And are there any economists in the room? Are there any? Are they going to admit it now? There's one over here. Okay, I'm going to come to you in a second. Do economists feel embarrassed about both the crash and about these market stitch-ups?
Not enough, I think. Not enough. And I think what is really amazing is that there has been a glaring collective failure that we must admit, but still a lot, and too many economists are still like living in their small world, like autist people, like, exchanging nice arguments on obscure, non-important issues, instead of looking themselves in the mirror and trying to really find new ideas.
You're an economist. Do you live in a bubble?
But Shiv,
wait, I'm just going to get the microphone to the audience. 1 second.
Chandan,
no, 1 second, Chandan. Let's hear from the lady.
I don't think so. I don't work as an economist. No, I'm a head of the center-left think tank.
Okay,
I hope I don't do that.
Okay, so is 1 second. Is anyone else an economist out here? Do they want to admit it? Do no economists want to come to the new economics panel? Wow, that says a lot, maybe. Is that a lady are you putting your hand up, or just you're waving your glasses? No, you're definitely hiding. Okay, Rabbi, Chandran, and then we're going to go out to the audience.
I know many of them in the audience.
Oh, really?
Well, UNICEF was mentioned, and I just want to say that when we launched this alliance of religions for sanitation, this was also because with the Millennium Development Goals, sanitation is far and far behind. It's a huge failure. Now, we had this wonderful meeting with people from religions and also from governments. But in 1.5 years, it has not moved enough. And I'm asking sort of there should be some new ways of cooperation. There is a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of subsidies and everything around. There is a possibility, because we all have to look in our mirror. And I want to say to Chandran, you know, I have this problem. I'm so happy that I met you. We just met, yes, and we're going to work together.
Same here.
But I don't see the dichotomy. There is so much injustice in the past and still continuing. But it's not they and we, it's we. And to say one parable which is in all religions, humanity is like a body. When part of a body aches, the rest feels it. If it doesn't feel it, it's the beginning of death. That means that we can only find a solution if we really talk with each other, go deep into the psychology and look together, not how we can redeem the past, but how can we really develop the future.
Yeah, can I respond to that?
Yes,
yeah.
go.
So, you know, I have great difficulty when I say these things because someone said unconventional ideas. You know, I often feel like a pariah, instant, okay? Because I'm kind of challenging the narrative. I'm all for the dialogue, and I'm not being divisive. The reason I'm saying this is to say, are you willing to talk to me? Rather than me listening to you all the time, which is what we get in our part of the world. So I also am in totally agreement with you. I'm not saying the West can't change. I think it's going to be more difficult because I'm a pragmatist. It's difficult to ask people who have 3 cars to give them up. When I go to the United States and I say, why don't you have the 1-car policy? You know, 1 family, 1 car, you know, the Chinese thing with babies. They think I'm undercover Taliban. I mean, so all I'm trying to do is say, can we have that conversation in a very clear way? But one thing, Shiv, that I think is very important, we should not confuse the financial crisis with economics. It's 2 different things. The financial crisis was essentially politics, fraud, and embezzlement, Ponzi schemes. That is not economics. And this is how we kind of muddle many things up. And I'm going to be very clear that I am saying that the world needs to change, but it's very difficult to ask people who have a lot to give it up. Particularly, and if I can be very frank and perhaps controversial, particularly in democracies where people think they have a right. Now, so this becomes a problem.
Briefly, I want to ask you this question, which is what it pertains to. Look, there's plenty of billionaires in China. Will they be giving up their political rights to constrain their economic freedoms?
Believe me, one of the things that is well known in China is you do not want to be known as a billionaire. The common joke among billionaires is don't appear on that Forbes list because next month someone will come and knock on your door. So, you know,
but they're there, and they're part of the Communist Party, they're part of business.
Yeah, but what are you trying to say? China is corrupt? Or there's rich people? Of course there are rich people in China.
No, it's not corrupt, they're rich. Let's just leave aside how they gain that money.
Yeah,
but they are certainly rich, and what you're proposing is that people's rights, or political rights, should be constrained.
You'll notice I haven't had a rant. You'll notice I haven't had a rant against rich people. I think this is again sort of easy, kind of below the belt stuff. I am essentially talking about there will be rich people, and good luck to them. It's about the rules by which they make their wealth. Today, our economic model, which is the economic model we need to reform, is essentially premised on promoting relentless consumption, right? Promote relentless consumption so that you can buy things you don't need with money you don't have. And then the banks will find out a way to get you a house you can't afford and call it subprime. And then if you're middle class, which is a minority, to impress people you don't like. Okay? Now, that is essentially the economic model. But the more important point I want to make, though, is a relentless consumption model relies on 2 things: underpricing resources and externalizing true costs. Okay. That's why your iPad is made in China and not in California, my friends.
Okay.
Okay? This is why. You've got to understand all of these things.
The gentleman over there, you got a question?
Yeah. My name is Tirthanka Goyal. So I'm heading SOCHM in France, which is the Chamber of Commerce. So I would like to make a point here and a question. I was quite involved in the visit of the Indian Prime Minister, as we are talking a lot about India. And he was, first phase of his visit was in France, then in Germany, and then in Canada. So he was very well welcomed by the French government, of course, for some commercial interest in India, to sell the nuclear power technology in India and some planes. So anyway, after that, I was in India just last week, and we had a discussion in the Prime Minister office. What about these things? So I'm a little bit confused at this moment. Some of the economists, which are well known, are talking different things. Western things, they think in a different way, and people in Asia, they have the different problems and different solutions. So my question would be, keeping in mind these things, what is the real solution from the economics point of view?
Let me throw the question back on you. You might have an idea about this. What are the different things that people are talking about in India from an economic point of view? What economists are coming forward? No, I won't interject in that question. Go on.
I think they don't think about these things in India. You say the nuclear technology, not at all. The planes, they don't think about India, and some of the things has been well said by Mr. Chandran. They don't have food. They don't have basic sanitation things.
Oh no, I meant specifically Indian economists. What are Indian economists coming forth and saying that is different from what Western economists may be saying?
They've all been trained in the West, though.
Well, okay, sure, but maybe or maybe not.
First thing is well said. They were well trained, and they were given the high chair and honor by the Western countries. But okay, let's go by what you are asking me. Those Indian economists who are in India and who think in an Indian way. Honestly, they think they don't think about these things as we talk in Western countries. So one of the example I would like to say. They're talking about, let's say, they want to improve the things in India. They say, come and make in India, so that the jobs are created. There's an employment in India. But the problem is, Western country, they don't want to do that. And one of the example I would like to give, recently the planes and nuclear technology, they don't want to do anything in India despite a huge talk by the Indian Prime Minister. They say, we want to sell it, and then they tell about different problems like intellectual property rights, export control, and whatnot else. So my question again come back to you. Huh? So tell me, because I really want to take advantage by spending 1.5 hours here, what is the solution? Thank you.
Solutions, Mathilde.
I think the solutions here are more political than economics. You should not look to economics to solve all the problems, and a lot of things are more political than economical.
Okay, there is also, so there is economics. Can it be an objective study of humanity, right? Because if that's the case, then some of this falls away, whether you have different perspectives or some or not, because there's an objective truth about pricing in markets, and this is just how it operates. Or is it not like that at all?
Is it objective? Economics, it's political economy. So you have some aspects that are objectivized, but you still to have make political choices. So you don't have the right answer. The answer would depend on the choice you make.
Again, if anyone wants to talk about solutions on that basis, I have another question, though, if you don't mind. Okay, I'm going to ask my question, which is this. So let's just take a little bit more of a historical perspective. Let's go back to 45, across Europe, certainly, and also in America, going back even to the Great Depression, the last, basically, economic bust. There were a whole new other set of ideas put forward by Keynes and then by his students, which, but you required those academics really and an emergency of economy and war, etc., to implement those. And they were substantially different, but they required not political controls, but economic ones, which were really very broad. And things that we totally forget about, people's everyday economic lives were in fact constrained by the government for very good reasons, as they would say and argue. We have a similar emergency, but again, it would seem that no new ideas coming from even the Western perspective, let alone the, let's say, Eastern perspective.
The Chinese have new ideas. They have a straight controlled economy, which is anathema again to the Western narrative of what
it's not, though.
You
say that, but a controlled economy is exactly what even countries like Britain had for a very long time.
But then if the Chinese political system is not state controlled, why is the West constantly berating the Chinese? It is a mixture And there are many other ideas. I mean, if you go to what Mahathir did with capital controls, he was berated. The Indonesian examples, the Korean examples. So there are many other ideas, but these do not get the time of day.
Okay, they
in the
do get the time
forums.
of day in their own countries because
Yes,
they have
that's
their
what's
okay,
important.
so have capital controls worked? And would you say that
Absolutely worked, and today it's IMF policy.
And with India now, they are relaxing capital controls.
And we will
but they've
see.
also managed to be a democracy, right?
Yeah.
At the same time, unlike China, right? Which
And
has
you're
been a
saying
single party
democracy is better than the Chinese
No,
version?
I'm saying that there's two different models, but they both had capital controls.
Okay, my answer to your thing, the simple question would be this to ponder. If you were put in the last 30 years, would you rather be Chinese or Indian? The answer is very clear.
Well, you could also turn it around and say in the next 30 years,
Yeah,
which one would you
yeah,
rather
and,
go
in
to? But that's
and as
sort of
economists
zero-sum
say,
game.
in the long term, we're all dead. But, you know, looking at the
Okay.
experience of the long term, last
Much
30 years,
misquoted that
would you
part.
be poor, would you have been Chinese or Indian? And this is part of the dilemma of new economic ideas, because the political system essentially defines the economic actions.
So we have 4 minutes left. Does anyone have one last question? I know the rabbi has something to say as well. Oh, you have a solution. Go on, give me, you got 30 seconds. You're joking. Okay, well, that's a cruel joke, sir. That's a cruel joke. Okay, no, now you've made the joke. That's it. Your time's over. Go ahead, Rabbi, sorry.
Taking into account that economics is also political and not just objective. So, of course, there is a responsibility for the political system. And now comes about democracy, human rights, the responsibility for the earth requires a redirection of European Union and United Nations. They are not serving enough. So new economics cannot come without a new way of political behavior. And it may be strange, but I had the privilege to meet Martin Luther King just before the terrible murder. And he said also publicly, you try to put me in the corner that I'm only for the blacks, but I'm also for the whites. You put me in the corner that I'm only for those who have no power, but I'm also for those who struggle with power. You try to put me in a corner and then kill me. And the terrible prophetic words of what happened to him, it is also a lesson for us. We are one world in turmoil at the moment. There is violence that goes right through frontiers. We have the knowledge that we have to have more alliance between nations. And we have all those economic systems that try, like fair trade, which is very small, green economy, which is very small, and we have to have a unity. So it is now the responsibility, and I'm not sure whether you can do it here, to bring really the politicians and economists and the religious people, because I want to appeal, there is a change with us. Of course, we have done terrible sins in the past. We have neglected our responsibilities, but there is a tremendous power. So let's bring all of us together, not only now, here, but in the future.
I think that economics is grossly overrated. It's just a set.
Now you tell us.
It's a set of instruments which can be used wisely if you have the right politicians to use it. And I think we are lacking some instruments in a world deprived of resources. So my challenge to the economists would be develop these instruments, but whether the economy is working well or not is not because of good or not so good economists, but it's about political leadership and how we use the economic instruments we have. So in the end, it should be all for the betterment of humanity. It should be for a fair and egalitarian society. And the challenge is with us as citizens and with the politicians we elect. And let's not focus our eyes too much on the economists. They can help us, but they don't drive these processes.
Go on. 30 seconds.
Yeah, I know that I should not agree with my fellow panelists, but I agree with you, and I will add that we still don't expect too much from economists, but still, I think as economists we should definitely improve ourselves and be much more pluralistic. That's for sure. And then, yeah, we should use economics with caution and wisdom.
So, go on. Can you summate it in 20 seconds? 30,
Okay,
go
very
ahead.
quick one. I think we all know what the major challenges of the world are. The fatal mistake we've made is to think that economists have the solutions. And that's the big mistake we've made. We need many other people around the table, and they should outnumber the economists. The other final thing I'd say is sometimes I feel like Martin Luther King too. Being slayed. And finally, I think the new economics is you can never go into a supermarket and buy one and get one free. That's voodoo economics. How did they do that?
So, I think, thank you very much for joining us. I think that's lovely. I think it's been a wonderful session. I'm not going to wrap things up because we are now on the mark, but I think we've learned a lot. And please enjoy and take this with you for the rest of the day and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.